You see, now in Britain, for instance, they speak English from the time they are wee, you see, and then when they get into school, when they have to learn grammar and the rules, it's not an extra burden.
Absolutely.
But when we start with grammar, that puts everybody
but
off.
Isn't it? I wonder because you know when I was in my formative years in school and all, there was this cultural impediment. You know, in Sinhala the audience will recognize the kadua. You know, this looking down upon in a sense, or being apart from, or suggesting that those who wielded English were the elite of society and therefore needed to be, you know, marginalized or whatever. And they, you know, this entire cultural
No, I think that,
this resistance to English. I think, isn't that, you know, something that also we need to address?
Yeah, definitely. No, I would say that attitude is fast disappearing.
Changing. Okay.
Today, everyone recognizes that English is the international language, and it's not just English of the British people.
Sure, absolutely.
But it's a world language.
Actually, the 999th word, the millionth word was added just yesterday, Mr. Minister, is Jai Ho, which comes from the Hindi movie Slumdog Millionaire. So now it's been added into the English vocabulary. So you're very true about the cultural attitudes changing. I hope that is the case. Though. I still haven't got a sense of that.
I would expect that. Though there will be people who will resist it, but I think progress will take over.
Is that your same opinion about constitutional reform?
Well, yes, I always remain an optimist. Because I think we had to learn through our mistakes, and we have been going from one extreme to another. We had initially the Westminster model with first past the post system. That led to very dramatic changes of government and policy. And therefore, an attempt was made by the Constitution of 1978, drafted by the late J.R. Jayawardena, to have a proportional electoral system.
With executive?
With an executive president, where immense powers have been conferred on the executive president. And then you devalue the other institutions. And and also I think the worst feature of this whole thing is the fact that the unit of elections is the district. And unless you are very wealthy and have influence and a lot of maybe not only open support but covert support, you are not going to win, you see, and then the wrong type of person has started getting into the political leadership, who are not really representatives of the people in the true sense, coming from among the people. And we need to have a closer system where the electorates are smaller, as small as possible, so that a poor person, if he merits being a representative of the people, gets the chance of being elected. And people have the power and the voice to influence what is going on. So the fact that the people have been alienated from those who govern has led to all sorts of, you see, the problems of governance that the country is facing. From corruption to malpractice to inefficiency, all that flows from a situation in which those who are carrying out the governance are separated.
Well, there's a culture of impunity, I would imagine.
From the people.
But there's a culture of impunity with regard as well.
Which is what the 1978 Constitution has done.
But you are hopeful of change, and that's what I want to ask you with regard to what you said about the office of the executive, not the incumbent or previous incumbents, but the constitutional architecture of that office.
We are
would you not think that needs to be addressed? And how hopeful are you of that?
Yes, we have reached a consensus. Actually, I'm happy to say, on all the political issues relevant to drawing up a constitution. And we are advocating a return to the Westminster model cabinet government, executive power in the cabinet and the elected prime minister.
Yeah.
And so with that system, there will be a maximum devolution of power within a unitary framework.
This is what you've said, yes.
And the idea is, you may be familiar with the principle of subsidiarity. Sure. The idea is to give right down to village level the powers, the funding and the administrative backup, which will enable people at that level to attend to their needs, particularly their development needs. Now, once that is given, for instance, what we are proposing is that the level of local government, which is above that. So we go back to our traditional village committee system. There will be small wards, maybe 100, 200 families will elect a representative. And then these village committee will send one representative to the level of local government, whether it's the Pradeshia Sabha or municipal council. And the extra powers given to them through the constitution itself will thereby be used in the interests of the village.
Right.
You see. And they can do what they require to a large extent at that level.
This is the plus that you're talking about.
No, I'm talking of the APRC proposal.
Right.
Right, which is the exercise that the president put up in his manifesto, because he said that the whole conflict has arisen as a result of a political problem which needs a political solution. And therefore, to provide the political solution, the APRC was set up.
Would you, looking back retrospectively, from I don't know how many meetings you've had?
170.
Exactly, I mean, an immense amount of meetings over
3
years. Were the plans for your task, the reason for the APRs to be set up, far more ambitious than what was at the end of the day achieved?
No, I think I'm happy to say, you see, ultimately, we have to reach a maximum possible all-inclusive consensus.
Is that the lowest common denominator or is it aspirational?
No, it's like this. We started out with what we thought were the aspirations of all communities, and in particular the minorities. And I drafted the document taking some of the ideas that surfaced from an expert committee that was also set up by the president to assist us. And then this document was, when it was made known, accepted by most sections of our community, and definitely the minority sections. Right. The Tamils, Muslims were happy. Then now we have to get the maximum possible consensus for it. And then we had discussions issue by issue at considerable depth, where we analyzed all the factors related to that particular issue, what needed to be considered, and then based on that, you see...
But the mechanism itself became less and less participatory, didn't it?
No, well, in the sense that...
I mean, through no fault of your own, but,
you
the
see
mechanism, the architectonics of it.
No, I thought the first meeting would be the last meeting, but it was so confrontational. Yeah. But I'm happy to say that good sense prevailed, and after that we have been working together very amicably. But after 21 meetings, the JVP decided to withdraw, saying that they are opposed to devolution. Right. Now,
and they have recently called for the disbandment of the APRC, calling it unethical.
So I gather. But they keep on talking about our needing to develop an indigenous solution to our problems. And what better opportunity than this? This is an indigenous committee which is made up of the political parties in parliament, which have been elected by the people. And we are meeting together. There is no foreign person coming into this soup, you see. And then everyone is free to express their ideas, and the JVP can't deny that. So now during this whole process, they actually came to a position of acceptance, and then when we gave a press statement to that effect, they suddenly withdrew and renounced what they had.
But how does